Hello and welcome to the Trusted Professional Podcast provided by the New York State Society of Certified Public Accountants. I am Calvin Harris Jr., a CPA and Chief Executive Officer of the Society, and I'm your host. This is a podcast provided by NYCPA, where I interview leaders in the accounting profession in New York and beyond, as well as those who influence this space. We help you connect, learn, and lead within the accounting profession. In this episode, we present a discussion with Zach Gordon, a CPA with over 16 years of professional experience across multiple industries and functions. Before we get to Zach, let's discuss our news of the day. First, within the society itself, I want to welcome you to the fall and some of our exciting events that are coming up in the very near future. Following an exciting night with the Yankees and exciting events upstate, we are looking forward to an event in Buffalo where we recognize new CPAs, as well as one in our southern tier where we also will recognize some of our younger CPAs. You can see those events and so many others at the New York State Society event calendar on our website. So please tune in there for that information. Next, let's talk about some news outside of New York. We often talk about the influence of private equity funding in the accounting profession and how much of it is coming into our profession. Well, recent article from Inside Public Accounting discussed how Doreen Mayhew's partners received private equity funding through Audax Private Equity for their strategic growth. Doreen Mayhew is an IPA 100 firm based in Troy, Michigan, and they've entered into an alternative practice structure with Boston-based Audax Private Equity, an alternative investment manager and capital partner to middle market companies to help support the firm's growth and innovation. The firm announced that investment will provide additional capital to help Doreen Mayhew accelerate their growth and invest in the firm's client offerings, tech infrastructure, and employee and client experience. The firm will also look to make acquisitions in the geographic footprint. The terms of the transaction were not disclosed, but is expected to close in September. The firm's current leadership team will remain in place and will continue to manage operations as well as provide strategic direction for the firm. Well, my take on that, of course, is that we've certainly seen these sort of articles recently, ongoing articles in terms of PE investment coming into the accounting profession. I think at this point we should expect to see and hear these sort of news pretty much on a regular basis, but we'll continue to bring those to you as they occur. Lastly, we want to also talk about a recent article from Accounting Today talking about how federal lien notices dropped significantly. Per Accounting Today, the number of notices of federal tax lien has declined significantly since 2010, according to a report from the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. For example, last year, over 179,000 NFTLs were filed. That's down roughly 80% from the high in 2010 of nearly 1.1 million. Since that peak, filings have generally declined, reaching a low in 2022 of 157,000. As so many of us know, the Internal Revenue Service sometimes uses liens to collect delinquent tax from taxpayers, and when the IRS first files it, they must notify taxpayers in writing within 5 business days of their right to have a hearing before the IRS's Office of Appeals. But that was recently found that the IRS properly notified 3 out of 4 taxpayers when analyzing a sample of more than 103,000 filings. Of that sample, 270 taxpayers were potentially not timely mailed a notice. So essentially a fairly small percentage. That said, we're still seeing those filing going down. You can go to Accounting Today in that article to see some of the recommended actions related to that area. Now, with that said, and some of the news of the day covered, let's now go to our discussion with Zach Gordon. I'm really excited to have our guest today, Zach Gordon. I'm going to read you his bio, and it's amazing just how much he's done. So Zach Gordon is a CPA with over 16 years of professional experience across multiple industries and functions. He's the founder of Red 5, which serves as a fractional CFO, strategic and tax advisor for a portfolio of crypto, cannabis, tech, and other clients, so all cutting-edge organizations and industries. Zach focuses on tax planning and optimization, financial modeling and advisory services, business structuring, and transaction support. He was previously a principal in the accounting service group at a top 50 CPA firm and the leader of the firm's cannabis advisory and digital assets practices. Zach has served in various leadership roles, including co-leader of the cannabis and digital assets practices at a regional accounting firm, founder and CFO for many startups. He was also a founding member and managing partner of a cannabis-focused technology incubator and investment group based right here out of New York. He's a frequent author and speaker and has been published in many accounting and cannabis industry publications, including Accounting Today, CPA Trendlines, Cannabis Industry Journal, Tax Stringer, Law 360, and Yahoo Finance. He's also been spotlighted in the Society's information as well. He's a regular speaker at the AICPA's annual Cannabis Industry Conference, as well as many national and regional conferences and podcasts. He is a proud graduate of Binghamton University, Bachelor of Science degree in accounting. And as I said in the very beginning, a CPA. I'm really excited for this conversation. So Zach, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. And I hope I can live up to that bio. Who wrote that thing?
Well, there you go. You know, I tend to tell people the absolute worst part of the podcast will be when I read your bio. Because if you're anything like me, the moment you start hearing those things, you first there's like an initial pride. It's like, wow, I did all those things. Then after a while, it's like, okay, when is this going to end? And then toward the end, it's just embarrassment. Or maybe that's just me. But
you hit that on the head. Oh man.
Well, look, it's all well deserved. So I'm really excited to have you on board. And you've done so many things. But you know where I always like to start is with the origin story of sorts. So how did you get from where you are now, you know, from the very beginning to where you are now? What's your story? How did you get into accounting?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think it goes all the way back. If we can remember a time around 2006, 2007, you mentioned Binghamton. Let's go Bearcats. You know, it was one of those things, almost looking for what's the right path. In business school, always been sort of a logical person. You know, things have a certain process and order. Apparently, I've been an accountant from the start because it was deep in my core from when I was young. Yeah. And it's one of those things that this is sort of the next logical step. This is the logical industry. I happened to make friends with a few graduates who were in industry, and it just all clicked for me. So yeah, made the jump into public accounting, went to what is now CBiz, was Mark's Paneth at the time. And it just sort of worked from there. I got my feet wet and went through tax audit advisory, got to see pretty much everything you could see, and got to one of those points where I could stay and, you know, ride this thing out for a long time, or I could see what the other side of the table was like. And so after about 5 years, it's like, well, you get that itch after a little while. And, you know, I had a great professional experience from public accounting, but yeah, you get a little curious. So I made the jump to private equity, and everything just sort of took off from there.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, Zach. It seems to me that from the private equity, from the PE to the digital assets, you are in industries well established, in industries where so many CPAs are just now starting to catch on. Even though it's been in the news for a little bit, for quite a while.
Just a little bit.
Just for a little bit.
News, right?
But oh, absolutely good news. But you're in there. I'm curious, how did you decide on those particular industries? I mean, they're all different, obviously, but they all have the consistent theme, through line, at least in my opinion, of being areas where CPAs have not necessarily historically been. I mean, heck, even the fractional CFO work, it's a lot more commonplace now, but you know, way back in 2006, you know, admittedly, I think that's right around the time that you know, shortly after the time that I had stopped working in that space, and I had to explain to people what the work was. So, I mean, how did you get in these areas that are so consistently cutting edge for us?
Well, this is going to sound really cliche, and I don't mean it this way, but they sort of chose me. So this is during my startup time. So I was co-founder of a tech company. We're in a WeWork. I mean, just again, hitting every cliche you could possibly find here. And just coincidentally, in the office next to mine was a retired Wall Street professional who was working in cannabis. He was getting interested into digital assets. And we hit it off, became good friends. We started just pushing things back and forth. And he's like, listen, you're CPA. You've got sort of that, you know, the technical side covered, even though this is back in 2016.
Oh, it's Wild West.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was still a little wild, but it was super wild then.
Oh, man, you're talking about not even the foundations for a settlement being in the ground yet. It was early.
Right.
And it just sort of went from there. It obviously was super interesting. And it's a very rare opportunity to be able to go down that road without it necessarily being set. And it goes out saying, self-preservation is a big deal. So making sure that my license wouldn't be of concern. We're dealing with things, cannabis still technically is federally illegal. Obviously, there's a lot of gray area when it comes to digital assets. You work so hard to get that CPA license. Those 3 letters mean a lot. So that sort of preservation, that's how I got in contact with the state society, spoke with pretty much every authority I could think of just to make sure, am I going to be okay working these industries? Not signing off on any audits necessarily, but just getting more and more involved. So from that end, that was the first big jump. And when I got a resounding, just don't do anything crazy, it's sort of paraphrasing, it just sort of went from there.
But it probably wasn't far off from that. It probably wasn't far off from that, though, right?
I might have cleaned that up a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, this is New York, so I'm sure it was a little more precise. You really touched on a lot there. So I think one thing that you said in passing, but it seems like it was a major impact, is just that you were in a working environment where you would just run into someone that was in a different industry, which that sounds like the cornerstone of that type of work, particularly the fractional CFO work. If you're in a co-working space, I don't know if anyone from WeWorks is listening, but you're the type of person they should have on there to say, here's a benefit that you can actually have working here. You can get your next career path just from working in our space.
They might have quietly pushed that once or twice.
Oh, I see. Okay. You don't have to disclose. I get it. Well, but that's really interesting, though. What I also caught on with, and I will say, the question on whether CPAs, we'll be more specific here, New York State CPAs are in a comfortable spot if they're working in the cannabis industry. I think the answer you just gave from however many years ago, that's still the answer now. I can say that even recently, the State Society had asked some of our colleagues throughout the state for their opinions on the matter. And, we recognize that, being hard on the record in writing is a little tough place when you're still talking about the status of cannabis on the federal level, but the state level is so different. But one of the questions that I even have received very recently over the last month or so was, is this compromising the ethics of being a CPA just by doing the work? And I'm really pleased with the answer I got on that on many levels. But also, it seems to me one of the things to where I think the CPA can be so vital, particularly someone like yourself, is that it's especially important to have someone like a CPA in a developing industry, in a nascent industry, because we're trained, beyond the state requirement. The ethical obligation we have to be as a trusted professional, no pun intended. We're built for this. So, I mean, have you found, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but have you found that, being a CPA has made you stronger in this industry? Or if so, how? Or maybe not. I mean, how have you found it to be?
I don't think there's even a question. I think there's still a certain gravitas. I think there's a certain impact of being a CPA, especially one with experience in this industry. And even a step further, you mentioned ethics. In my mind, I don't think the concern is necessarily ethics from an industry standpoint. And obviously there's concern, the legality at a federal level. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're coloring inside the lines as much as possible, given a lot of the concerns here. But I think where it's really important is you're dealing with an industry that was and still has a very powerful illicit market right now. So making sure that you're working with the right potential clients, making sure that you're protecting yourself and the public good. I think there's a lot to be said for that. And so that's where we can have a major impact. There's obviously the social equity side to this. There's the institutional side to this, the investment, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different areas where, given our experiences, even in other industries, you can bring that here to cannabis. And I think that's a very unique perspective that specifically as CPAs we bring.
That's so important, so critical. If you don't mind me pivoting for a bit, your comments there makes me think of something. So many, many, many years ago, in my former state, I had bid on doing some work with, as it turns out, a potential dispensary. And one of the biggest challenges I had, it was doing the projections, the pro forma for the bank. And that bank, I won't name the name obviously, but that bank clearly didn't really want the business. And again, we're talking about a decade ago, so it's a different sort of place. But it was like one of the toughest things was just to find the basic infrastructure. We had, I was going to be the CPA. They had an attorney, but after that, it was like we're building it up from scratch. I mean, have you found that to be the case with your clients? I mean, are they fairly sophisticated, or are you doing a lot of the ground up work?
Like all great accounting questions, the answer is it depends.
Well, at least I set you up well for it.
You put that up perfectly. But joking aside, it really does depend, because I think you have some very large, whether publicly traded or privately held companies that are working across multiple states. They have a good amount of infrastructure themselves and just need pieces in the right place. And then you have a whole industry of brand new startups. You have a whole group of applicants, of mom and pop shops, whatever term you want to use for them, where, you're rolling up your sleeves and you're getting very much involved. And I think to take that a step further, there's become an army of consultants. It's the same as with other industries, but there's a cannabis premium on top. So if you have these large consulting firms, advisory firms that are working in big tech, or pick another industry, I'll throw another 20, 25, 50% on top. And that's what you're looking at. It is not cheap to get started. And I think that's where, as well as trusted advisors, to put that back in there one more time.
There you go.
That's where we can bring a lot of value. To not necessarily helping to negotiate, because that depends on a whole lot of factors, but just to give your guided opinion on whether someone or a company is a good fit, of whether this makes sense, and to bring it back from an FP&A, from a budgeting function. Does this make sense 1, 2, 3, 5 years out?
That makes sense. So are you seeing similar, of the other, well, one of the other industries you're focusing on? Do you see a similar sort of approach when it comes to your digital assets work? I mean, I would imagine, a lot of the cannabis work involves some degree of brick and mortar, but I would imagine digital assets, you hardly ever have brick and mortar to worry about, right?
That's right. But the brick and mortar has become digital brick and mortar, if that makes sense. People have asked me a few times, how do you get into both industries? Like, how does it make sense? And honestly, I mean, there's a certain part of your head that gets compartmentalized, because there are very different rules and regulations that apply to both industries. But it's almost very similar. It was actually very straightforward to learn both, because anything from any other industry, you just turn it upside down, and you're already 60% of the way there.
I understand that completely. Yeah. I will say, certainly partly by function of my CEO role, I know a number of folks in the cannabis space, a number of folks in the digital asset space. I'm hard pressed, present company excluded. I'm hard pressed to think of too many folks who I know are, deeply into both. Some people say that I do this area as an area, but it's not really their expertise. But it's a pretty small group. So I think you're pretty unique in that regard, to where you're in, well, and that's before we even talk about the fractional CFO work. You're deep in areas that are, let's say, non-traditional. And I honestly mean that only in a good way.
No, and honestly, I could describe my whole career that way, as non-traditional. I take that in the spirit in which it was intended.
Yeah, no, I only mean it that way. I will say, just even when I had the opportunity, not as much on the digital, but certainly on the cannabis, that it was just finding basic guidance when I was trying that work 10 years ago was next to impossible. Unfortunately, I'll jump to the end of my little book on this. The client and I ended up not working out because the bank reneged on the funding and the financing.
Oh, wow.
No financing made it impossible. And in that state, they were the one bank, literally at the time, one bank who was in that space, to where if you didn't get money from them, tough luck. So there you go. That's the end of my cannabis career was quite short, decided by a bank. So
unfortunately, that's not the only time we've heard that story.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, we end up having all these different challenges, and I would imagine, and with you being in these emerging industries, your challenges are different than so many others. But even broadly speaking, I always like to ask our interviewees, what challenges do you see in the profession? So I'll ask you that same thing. What do you see as our biggest challenges right now? And you could go industry specific if you want, or however you want to go. What do you see the big challenges are?
I think we've got a few. And this is a very popular answer, so I'll start with the most obvious one. And you're smiling because you already know what the answer is, right? It sure does. But I'll relate this to what we were talking about before. And part of the reason why I dedicate a whole lot of time to cannabis, to crypto, to these emerging industries, is because they're interesting. It's because they're non-traditional, because it's something new and exciting. And I think to circle that back around to the pipeline issue, for anyone who hadn't guessed already, we have a big misconception, I think, from the greater public that all accountants, all CPAs just sit in a back room, whether they have the old green hat, the green visor on, or the adding machine, whatever the cliches might be. But every accountant does tax. And that's not true. We get deep into all these fun industries. We get into these really, really interesting engagements that are very different than what most people think. So I think if we're talking about a broader challenge, pipeline's a big part of it. But I think to take a step back, we have a big branding issue.
Oh boy. Yeah.
And it's generations old.
When I'm pushed to give one answer on it, I consistently say relevancy. And I admittedly borrowed it, maybe even stole it from a former CEO of another state, because he was very passionate about it. And I started listening to him saying, I was like, you're right, because everything I think of still comes down to that. And even what you said now in terms of pipeline, you're doing areas where, for those who aren't necessarily seeing any video, Zach, I'm going to make an educated guess that you're on the younger end compared to many CPAs, despite your years of experience. And I don't think it's coincidental that you come in with a fresher approach, a fresher way of looking at things, and that ends up showing up. But that's not necessarily what potential CPAs see as their opportunity. One of the things that I feel so strongly that we ourselves forget about is that CPAs and accountants are needed in every single industry under the sun. Everything, no matter what it was. You can randomly look around whatever room you're in, you could just point at something and you can be doggone sure that there was an accounting person involved in bringing that to market. We're needed everywhere.
Couldn't say it better. One of the biggest projects we have going on right now is actually diving deep into the analytics of a digital media company.
Really?
And extracting every little bit that we can, validating the KPIs that make the most sense, and then putting them to work. And that is definitely not debits and credits. That's definitely not tax. It's not even audit. This is something that, we're rolling up our sleeves and we're really diving in there with a really, really interesting company that's doing things that in that particular industry, we haven't seen anyone else do.
Is that more like data analytics, forensic sort of work?
Exactly right. And so then it gets into the whole dashboarding thing, and then they're creating a new business model based off of that. These new, how to dance around this without being too specific. But anyway, it's some really cool stuff that is, again, very, very non-traditional.
Well, once again, more cutting edge, more non-traditional. And you touched on something that after relevancy, I think is one of our challenges is, and maybe it's very close connected, storytelling as well. Because you mentioned a dashboard. I love dashboards. I'll admit, full disclosure, I'm really terrible at these things now. I'm not even sure I could do a decent pivot table. I'm embarrassed to say I probably shouldn't.
Oh, don't sell yourself short. Come on. Just like riding a bike.
Well, we'll see. I've fallen off a bike too. So
oof, man.
I always find it interesting because when I see CPAs, and I know you're actually in this bucket, so you don't have to admit it or not. I'm going to just admit it for you. Is that those CPAs who are good storytellers, and I don't mean that in terms of making things up. I'm not saying that at all, but there are a lot of people who are very intimidated by numbers, and the CPA who can really take that complicated information and just put it into a digestible form is going to have so much advantage over the other person who can't. Even if you're not necessarily as good. I'm not saying, again, I'm speaking to me, the guy who can't do a decent pivot table. Even if you can't do it extremely well, but you can articulate in a way that people understand, you will be so higher valued than other people. I mean, have you found that to be the case in what you've been doing?
No question. And if I can tell a silly anecdote from one of my first years in public accounting.
Please do.
One of the most impressive things I think I've ever seen is working on a pretty large engagement. It was my first or second year in public accounting, and there's a very high level partner whose engagement it was, and they were not the most involved in the detail work. Let's just say that.
Right.
And they looked at the totality of the engagement, and in conservatively 39 seconds, we're able to sum up everything, like literally just flip through the materials we prepared, picked out the 3 things that were wrong, handed it over, handed it back, and then told the whole story to the client like they'd been working on it every single minute of every single day for the last 3 months.
Isn't that amazing when they can do that? I can think of specific partners at Anderson who could do that. I was like, it blew me away the first time I saw that.
And honestly, that, as you can tell, it leaves an impression. It's like, man, I want to be able to do that. And you're so right that it is storytelling. It's taking a whole lot of numbers, data, whatever you have, and translating that to something that makes sense for whoever your audience is. And that's such a really, really tough skill set.
Well, what you said, Zach, makes a lot of sense, and it can't help make me but wonder, and you may have touched on a little bit when it comes to us CPAs. What's 1 or 2 things, or even a few things about us CPAs that you think they consistently get wrong? They could be whoever. They might be other CPAs, but what do folks get wrong about us?
Oh, man, where to begin? And how much time do we have to answer this question?
Well, it's a long-form interview.
Oh, boy. Hope we have enough tape rolling for this. But we've hit on a bunch of them already, that all accountants do tax. That's all we know. That there's not new opportunities for new industries. That there's, just sort of this little path. We talk about pipeline. We talk about all these different things. There's new competition for CPAs that had a generation ago didn't exist. You have big tech. You have this startup community. You have this, I'll say, newer generation, and it's not an age thing. It's more of a mindset sort of thing that's very different. And I think that's something that as an industry we have, both within the industry and outside. I think there's a big challenge in recognizing that and adapting our game. I don't think there's any question that this is, we can be a little slow moving. We can be a little slow to move in a new direction.
Never.
Weird, right? No accountants ever set in their ways. Come on. But I think that's something that's a big challenge, but I also think a big opportunity. We've talked about cannabis, crypto, there's AI, there's all these new and interesting things that are coming up, and all these new ancillary areas that I think make for a much more interesting time. If we're trying to answer the question, what don't outsiders, those outside of public accounting know about us, CPAs, accountants, I think it's the fact that we do all these fun and interesting things, just no one ever recognizes it, and we don't recognize it ourselves. We're just as guilty.
That's true. It's interesting. So you ended up in these fast moving areas by virtue of the accounting firm that you went in. Of course, you went on your own. If someone was interested in any of these areas, you listed all 3 that I very frequently hear people ask me, how do I get involved? How do I get, and you got in this through what I would imagine was a forward looking accounting firm, at least to some degree. If a student or someone, even established CPA were looking to come in those areas, how would you suggest they approach them?
Well, the good news is there's no shortage of information sources. Dirty little secret on how I try to keep up on all this stuff, it's Google Alerts. So
yeah, they are helpful.
Oh, man. So I have probably, 20 of those lined up, and then, just peek my way through. So that's, every day, just, making sure I dedicate at least a few minutes to taking in as much as possible. But honestly, it's getting out there, figuring out who are the right sources to speak to, and whether that's an individual, whether that's an organization, whether it could be the State Society of CPAs, and maybe joining a committee to check out from subject matter expert. Plug.
Hey, we do have committees at the State Society, by the way. Right, of course.
But joking aside, that's probably the best way. And there's plenty of conferences. There's plenty of opportunities to get out there. There's meetup groups. There's any number of opportunities now. And, if you're on social media, that's probably as well the most incognito way to do it. If you have a question, honestly, LinkedIn is a great way to go, as cliche as that is. Again, people seem to actually respond at a higher percentage than you would think. So even if you're aiming for someone that seems relatively high up, take a swing. See if you can start a conversation.
That's very important. I frequently tell that to students, especially because it can be so intimidating to reach out to quote their words, an adult. who is in those areas. And I say, just, reach out to them anyway, because a lot of times if it's the right person, they'll actually be excited to talk to you about their area anyway. So it'll be mutually beneficial.
And for some of us, try and stop us. It's
yeah, right.
Once we get rolling, it doesn't stop. But I think especially if you're in high school, if you're in college, I would be hard pressed to find someone who wouldn't want to take the time to have that sort of discussion.
That's very well said. I admittedly don't have quite as much line of sight to the digital assets committee of the society. That's more me than the committee, obviously. But on the cannabis side, I've taken note that it seems to be, and correct me if you think I'm wrong here, it seems to be in that area, it's very much an industry focused group that goes well beyond geography and well beyond even profession. So at least here for the folks downstate here in New York City or some of the surrounding, there seems to be as much involvement with on both sides of the Hudson. New Jersey and New York seem to work extremely close together to where it's all but just one area, and that includes CPAs and lawyers and bankers and other professionals that seem to work extremely close with each other, to where I admittedly haven't seen this in but so many other industries. I see it in some of our tax work on the estates, interestingly enough, to where it seems like this is just kind of like a community in and of itself, to where I've met various, and I'm not even in the work, obviously, but I've met various lawyers that are in the cannabis space based out of New Jersey, just by trying to support that. And same thing with some professionals out of Denver, handful of professionals I know up out of New England, to where y'all just seem to have a real tight camaraderie that I admittedly haven't seen in that many industries there.
That's how we founded the committee. So for anyone who doesn't know the story about it, so I was one of the individuals who pushed the committee. I think it was 2017. It took us a minute to get together, but it was a whole community effort. So it wasn't just CPAs that got it over the finish line. It was obviously the great staff at the State Society, but there's lawyers, there's finance professionals, there was industry experts. It was everybody. So to your point, I think that speaks to the foundation, and just the fact that you go back the 8 years or however long it's been, might as well be 80. There were so few professionals who actually had the experience. So making sure that it was as widely involved as possible really, really made a difference. And you can see that today, as your own experiences has shown.
Yeah, no, it's admittedly and it's certainly not only in our cannabis committee, certainly encouraging people to check that committee out. But I've seen it in a number of our other committees, but it's one of the few committees I have to admit, of our few New York-based committees, where I've had a chance to meet people all around the country who actually came down or out to New York for a committee meeting. And I was like, well, wait a minute, you're from Colorado. Why are you here? I asked him, why are you here? I said, well, this is my community, and we all talk anyway. I had a chance to come out. I said, okay, fine. But I think that's a great thing. And I think that shows the pull of community, because it ended up, in the end, the way I see it, it helps everybody be better, helps everyone do much better work for the people we're serving. And, for those in there, you've got a natural group and crew to kick things around with if you're facing issues. Have you found that to be the case as well?
I don't know if I could articulate it any better than that. I think that was perfectly said. And I mean this in the best way possible, but I think as New Yorkers, we're, native or adopted, of course.
Yeah. Adopted here, right?
We do take on that leadership role. And I think we have, it's a factor of New York being the finance capital of the world. It's, there's a lot of other factors, including the economic firepower that originates here. It's not just that, obviously, there's a lot of other factors, but I think we have the unique seat to lead this off. And I think this, if you talk about value of the State Society, for example, I don't know if there's too many other opportunities to get this sort of access to professionals, to content, to be able to just ask the question. I don't mean this as a as a plug or commercial, because
no, plug away. I was about to say that for people to pay their dues. You're setting me up so well. But yeah, do pay your dues, by the way.
No, please send the check in. Actually, what's a check? I don't know.
Right. But I have a checkbook in there somewhere, but who knows?
I'll be honest, I don't. But joking aside, I think this is one of the unique aspects that we have as being in New York, that we get access to everyone across the country, and people look to the state society, to the professionals here to make that next move to sort of dictate what the conversation can and should be.
There is a uniqueness to New York that you just can't find anywhere, in ways overwhelmingly good and sometimes a little challenging, but there's a reason to say if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. But if you've got sensitive feelings, it may be a little tough at times. But I can tell you that the knowledge here is deep, and the passion for this industry and others is, second to none. And there's a reason why. You said it so well. New York City, biggest city in the country. And then you even go with the rest of the state. Upstate is much smaller, obviously, than New York City, but that area alone is a huge geographic area and is a huge source of population that's actually bigger than most states by itself. So there is something special about being here. So I think it's natural that New Yorkers are leading the way on this, especially yourself. Now, Zach, I want to try something different here. I want to do a bit of a thought experiment. You've had a lot of interesting experiences we talked about. We talked about challenges, your origin story, but let's just say for now that you're like King Zach. You're king of the profession.
What a terrifying concept. Go on.
Well, we'll see how terrifying it is from your answer too. So, I mean, if you had the ability to just do anything, and I mean, I won't even say within reason, unlimited resources, no constraints, what sort of innovative project or initiative would you take on to, for the profession or for the world? What would you do? You're King Zach.
Wow, that sounds like a T-shirt right there, just waiting to happen.
It might be.
Interesting idea. No, I think that's a fascinating question, and I'll be honest, it's one I've different terminology maybe, but it's a thought that I've had before. What could we do better, and what opportunities are there? And honestly, I think there's opportunity to go through a bit of a consolidation. It's no secret that there's a whole lot of firms out there. Depending on which survey you believe, there's between 680, 700,000 CPAs out there. There's a whole lot of small firms, and there's a whole lot that are looking for that next transition. So whether that's retirement, whether that's acquisition, consolidation, any number of avenues there. So I think if money weren't necessarily an object, I think there's a real opportunity to go through a bit of a call to consolidation. Again, we can have fun with the terms, but I think coming up with a way to bring all these smaller firms together and unite them under, one relative flag, but technology being the key. And I think that's where, if I had that whole team of devs, developers, for anyone not as familiar, you don't even need some fancy AI infrastructure. You just need good process, and you just need the right consistent technology and approach. And you can do some real damage here. I think we're past the point of the billable hour being the only way to build a business model. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do things, to learn from other industries. And as I'm sure everyone is sort of tired of hearing about, I've seen a lot, plenty of other industries and the successes, the failures of those other industries. And there's lessons to be learned and things that we can bring in. So I think if I could wave that magical wand, if I had the crown, I think that's the avenue I'd want to go. Uniting under that one flag, making sure that there are the right, not necessarily technology partners, but technology and processes internally, so that you're empowering the professionals in-house, you're making a great experience for the clients, you're being as transparent as possible, especially with pricing, because that's obviously an area of sensitivity. That's where I would start.
I think you're onto something there. This thought experiment is supposed to be, if you had no limitations and unlimited resources, but this one actually is practical. Think about the things that exist right now that a lot of CPAs don't take advantage of. There are interesting opportunities. There's a whole conversation, I realize, to be had about the impact that private equity is having, not even to say will have, is having and will continue to have on the profession. It's happening. It's here. Now it's up to us, in my mind, Calvin's opinion. It's up to us to take advantage of it, because it's already happening. So to pretend it's not is just silly to me. And I don't think it's necessarily evil or beneficial. It's all about how we use it. But then you think of offshoring, the power of other countries. I can tell you, talked about the uniqueness of New York. I can tell you very comfortably, from this chair, there are entire accounting organizations in other countries that want to do work specifically with New York because of the power of New York. So there are so many opportunities. So I think a person that can think a little strategically could actually do what you just said there. I mean, not necessarily easily, and you have to figure out different things in terms of structure and what type of entity you want. Here in New York State, we finally have non-CPA ownership as an option. At the time of this recording, it's not quite effective yet, but it will be effective by September of this year. Maybe by the time we release this, it might actually be effective. But we are the 49th state to go on board, but I'd say the most important of those 49 because it presents another opportunity. So I think firms could do very much what you said there. So hopefully someone picks up on that and sees the opportunity that you just laid out for them so nicely. They should send you assuming you don't do it yourself, or can you do it yourself? They should be sending you a bit of a retainer, Zach, as a consultant.
Well, there might be a couple of irons in the fire on that front. But,
there we go. You don't have to say anything more.
No, it's. But I think there's one area that we didn't talk about, and it's personalities. It's not just integrating clients and process and all that, but it's getting the buy-in. And I think it's change is scary for anybody, but especially we've talked about this a little bit. Getting different personalities, getting different ways of doing things, et cetera, et cetera. That's probably, honestly, the biggest challenge of all. So that I don't think you can't abracadabra that. There's no magic technology tool out there that'll just get everyone to straighten up and fly in the same direction. There's a lot more to it.
Oh, that's so true. And this, particularly when you're talking about some sort of structure, like you said there, but this applies in any organization. The rising and the fall of them is so often driven by the people involved and the personalities involved and people's ability to work together. I don't have any studies backing this up, but I still feel confident enough to say it that, CPAs tend to be those who are conservative in nature. We start with, conservatism is one of the things I learned in high school. In high school bookkeeping, I remember the word conservatism coming up. So we're not necessarily going to be the ones that are doing things on the fringes, but in some cases we miss really good opportunities there. So I think you're onto something. Well, when you were talking personalities, I thought you were about to say, you don't have to wear a suit and a tie. You can wear an ugly T-shirt. You can.
Oh man, do we want to have the corporate culture conversation? Shoot, that's
a whole different one. Right?
There's another hour right there, man.
Well, I can very comfortably say that clearly some firms do it better than others. And at least from my vantage point, I tend to see entrepreneurs are even better than that in firms because they're just starting something from scratch. So they're able to get it, built into the culture from the beginning. I tend to believe, though, people want to work in environments where they're having fun. And it might even sound a little childish to put it just that way, but when you're having fun doing the work, because every job, anyone who thinks otherwise, I think they're kidding themselves. Every single job under the sun has times when it's just terrible. It just kind of sucks. It's just you just got to push through it. But if you're really enjoying and feeling real connected, then when those times happen, you just kind of deal with it and you move on. So CPAs tend to be extraordinarily good at talking about the challenges and how many hours they may or may not have worked during the busy season or the tax season. And don't give nearly as much time talking about how interesting and exciting the work can be. I mean, everything you've talked about are things that when talking to students, I can imagine they just kind of perk up. So I didn't even know I could do this as a CPA. Well, 10 years ago, you probably didn't, but that's what happens. It all moves along.
And anytime I've done recruiting or any, as I said, any of this type of outreach, it's like, wait, stop, go back to that. What do you mean? And it's really cool. When we talk about all the misconceptions, all the opportunities, all that, it's exactly
lots
right.
of them. All right. Well, I have two more questions for you. The first one is one I didn't even tell you I was going to ask you, but we've chatted enough offline and on things on LinkedIn. I think you'll probably be ready for it. So, who is your favorite accountant in media? That could be movies or television. Heck, it could even be a podcast. Who is your favorite fictional accountant?
Oh boy, and we had a very very good back and forth about
yes,
this.
Yes, I know.
And you did turn me around a little bit. So I know most people are going to say Ben Affleck, the accountant.
I want to stop you right there.
Easy answer.
Side note, because my COO, rightfully so, has gotten on me because at every podcast episode I keep bringing up his name. I want to just know for the record, I didn't bring Ben Affleck up first. I will lean into Ben Affleck now. So Ben Affleck, okay.
No, that's not my choice. I'm just saying I know that's the easy answer. Oh man.
Well, I really did step into that. Okay, I'll take the fall. I need to start sending Ben Affleck some money, or maybe you could send me some.
I think there's a long line of people sending him money. Shoot, we had a good back and forth about Skylar from Breaking Bad.
Yes.
And I think I started off very much on she's one of the worst TV characters of all time, on that side. But you turn me around a little bit on this because you go back and do a rewatch. She's got a couple tricks up her sleeves. She doesn't leave us in the best light, maybe. But from a pure interest perspective, very interesting character, and she certainly did some things.
There you go. And I will say, even my own thoughts on Skylar had evolved. So for those who haven't seen Breaking Bad, and if you haven't, shame on you. But I will say that shame on you. But just a quick recap, and this isn't a spoiler. Show's been off a number of years. So Breaking Bad essentially was a high school chemistry professor who became a meth kingpin over the course of a number of seasons. His wife, Skylar, is an accountant. She never said CPA, by the way, but she is an accountant. But her skills were, frankly, in some cases, CPA level, because at a certain point, she got, over the course of the season, got a client out of tax fraud. She also learned.
Well, ethically.
Oh no, ethically, she was in a very bad place. I won't give that away. That she went way off. She would have lost her license if that was found out. She also laundered money through at least one car wash. And back then, she got a lot of stuff because she wasn't supporting her. That people would say she wasn't supporting her husband. Ignoring the part that her husband was a drug kingpin, not so minor details. So I've come to the point of, all right, sure, her hands clearly aren't clean, but I think Skylar sometimes gets a bad rap, and she did the best she could under the circumstances, and I'm not willing to die on this hill, by the way, but I am willing to have a conversation about it. So Skylar's a good choice, and I will say, if someone goes back into I think either you or me and looked at our LinkedIn feed, they may be able to find it because it wasn't that long ago at the time of our recording. And at a certain point, I think a few people added pictures to the conversation.
Oh, yeah, that took a life of its own.
It became a whole different conversation. Someone offline literally asked me, why don't you do a podcast on accountants and media? I said, it's a crazy idea, but crazier things have happened. I mean, here we are right now talking, so who knows? Anything's possible.
Put a pin in that one.
Put a pin in that one. Check out a year from now. So, Zach, it's been a really great conversation. So, one last question, and this is your time to turn it around. Or we touched a lot of different areas. From how you got your start, some of our challenges, what you would do if you were King Zach, the very interesting areas you're in. But what's something or one thing or something important to you that we didn't actually talk about? So would you want our listeners to definitely also be aware of that we didn't already talk about?
I think 2 points, if you'll allow me. One, we sort of touched on a little bit, is AI. So I think one of the biggest issues out there for CPAs, accountants, in practice right now is AI our friend or is it our foe? Is it going to replace us? How do we deal with it? Can we just put everything into ChatGPT and let it go? I would say that AI is not our enemy, but you need to properly understand it before you deploy it. I think if it's handled the right way, it's a perfect complement. It's also a great way for, to strengthen the pipeline, all those fun things we talked about to bring this full circle. It's not something to be scared of, but it has to be respected properly. And you have to learn how to use it, bring in the right people, the right tools, et cetera, et cetera. So I think from that end, there's a lot of things that we could talk about there, but I think it's very important to get educated on the AI front. The other side, and anyone who has seen anything I've put up on LinkedIn or anything like that, mental health. That's a really underrated issue for public accounting in general, but especially CPAs, accountants. We work all these crazy hours. We do a lot of work, put a lot of pressure on ourselves. don't forget to take care of yourself. Whether that's just taking a break for a minute, taking a walk, meditating, yoga, Pilates, to take your pick on what your methods are to deal with it. But make sure that you are taking that time for yourself, because that is a really, really big deal.
Oh, those are both so absolutely true. AI, I could not agree more with everything you said there. It's one of those areas to where I think it presents such an amazing opportunity, especially for smaller firms to do such amazing and interesting work. I always tell students that AI won't necessarily take away the jobs that you might be going for. It'll actually make the job you get more interesting, because that means you won't have to do some of the really boring stuff that some of my age
all the ticking and tying, going through invoices.
No one would
get out of here. Yeah.
And mental health, I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. And you and I are talking now on a digital platform where previously it would be difficult to do it in this way. We might have to be in person. Obviously COVID and the pandemic accelerated a lot of things that were already happening, but I admittedly do worry that the advantage that technology has given us in terms of our connectivity is also the very challenge we have to worry about in terms of our own balance and mental health. You gave all those things. I admittedly do most of those things, not terribly well. My big thing tends to be running. I like to run very, very slowly, but I still enjoy doing it, because whenever I do that, it's hard for me to focus on work, even though some of the best ideas come while you're decompressing, and it just helps you be a better person.
Or you can be a real nerd multitasker and do CPE while you're running a marathon, which has been done.
Shout out to both you and Rumby, I believe. I believe both of y'all.
Rumby and I have talked about that. Yeah, that you have to be in a special place to be able to tick that box.
Oh, yeah. So Rumby Petrozzillo, episode 1, already up on the podcast. I don't think we talked about her running with CPE in her ear, but for those of you you can, and you can also listen to this episode while you're running. If you're at let's see, based on the time, you should be at mile 4 or 5. If you're at my pace, you might be at mile 3, but just keep going. You'll get there. So, but really good point, Zach. Zach, it's really always a pleasure chatting with you. I'm really so glad you're able to join us today. So thank you again for joining us today on the Trusted Professional Podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Calvin. So happy to be here. And this is a lot of fun.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Zach Gordon. Zach is one of our most active members in NYCPA and has areas touching a number of different sectors in the accounting profession. He's definitely an example of how CPAs can do very interesting work. Thank you, Zach, and we appreciate your time. And with that said, thank you for joining us on the Trusted Professional Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe now to get this podcast delivered to you when it's released. And of course, please do rate and review our podcast, as it helps us continue bringing episodes to you. In addition, if you aren't a current member of NYCPA, I ask you to join us and learn about more NYCPA events and activities at nysscpa.org and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening.